The last question that I want to ask you guys is, what do you think the biggest issue in race and ethnicity is going to be in the next 20 years? What are you going to be talking about for the fourth edition?
Gotta get that crystal ball out, huh?
You want to start?
Well, of course it's impossible to predict the future, but it's clear that the instability and the contentious qualities of race and racism in the United States are going to continue. There's a tremendous demographic shift underway as the United States becomes a majority-minority society. Lots of areas of the U.S. are already that way. California is that way. New York is that way. Other states, other cities are becoming majority-minority. What does that mean? What kind of alliances, what kind of common interests can be articulated, can be worked out politically across racial lines? And at the same time, obviously, what kinds of conflicts will there be? Will the U.S. move towards a more apartheid society? Or will the kind of enlightened leadership and movement pressure that we need be developed to challenge that and to press for a more democratic and egalitarian resolution? In many ways, it's hard to be optimistic about the future, but at the same time, there's a deep aspiration among us all, among many of us, not everybody certainly, for a greater sense of social justice. And I think that's what the struggle is going to be in the future.
I think there'll be some interesting developments with respect to pushing racial theory along as well, to sort of explicate with a much more clarity, I think, notions about the ways in which race intersects or interacts with other categories such as race, class, and gender and sexuality. I also think that there's a number of fields that need to be sort of merged or create a dialogue between. Some of the notions around unconscious racial bias, for example, that many of the psychologists and people in the mind sciences exploring are not really in conversation with some of the kinds of work of sociologists or economists who are looking at the more structural, institutional dimensions of racism. So what would it mean to sort of bridge these different kinds of fields of inquiry to have a much more robust or constitutive theory of how race and racism works? I think we're moving towards that as well. I think Howie's quite right in looking at what racial hierarchy is going to look like, not only in the United States, but in the world as well. So as we become a much more globalized entity, what does it mean for how race circulates, how racial meanings travel, how in fact people look at themselves, look at the world around them, and view it in particular kinds of racialized terms.
One thing that we've done in this book, and I think it's important to stress, is we've renewed our focus on color, on the body, on the corporeal dimensions of race, what's called phenotype, and how that feeds into not only profiling and snap judgments and the dynamics of inequality, but how that's been a historical anchor for racism in the country and beyond. So I think it's very important to take into account the racial body, and that's something that we maybe didn't emphasize as much as we should have in previous editions, and are now trying to focus attention on very clearly.
I think probably the last aspect I would mention is looking at what kinds of forms of racial dominance will occur, and how is racial rule enacted through various kinds of institutional sites. But also, what are the possibilities for challenge and resistance? How can people mobilize? What are the themes they would mobilize under, and issues that they would mobilize? And what does it mean to raise an effective anti-racist politics in the 21st century?
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much for sitting down with us today, and really appreciate your answers.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.